Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired justice of the New York State Supreme Court. 1940s Brooklyn, South Brooklyn, in fact, was a fantastic place to grow up. The street culture was lively, to say the least. It was actually electric. There was always something going on the street around the clock. It was really something. And it was very much not so American as it was European. I think you could find the same street culture in Naples or Barcelona or Paris or London, possibly maybe in Buenos Aires or cities like that. South Brooklyn then was very, and still is, a low-profile neighborhood in that most of the buildings were brownstones. There was nothing more than 4 or 5 stories high, which kept everything down to human scale. And there was a lot of light. There were trees. It was filled then with working-class families. Lots of kids, women at all the windowsills with little blankets or pads or pillows that they would lean with their 2 arms forward. And they were like the alarm system for the whole neighborhood. That was security. Nothing could go on in the neighborhood without those people at the windows, women, knowing what was going on. Most of the men worked in some manner, way, shape, or form on the Brooklyn docks, which were right nearby, just within a half mile away. And the neighborhood, we had push carts, trolley cars down Smith Street, where I lived on Union Street. There were horse and wagon vendors, and they were everywhere in those days. They'd come around with horses and wagons. The milkman would deliver milk to your door. The fishmonger would come around on a wagon, and the fish would be displayed under covers, and they would be on ice in the wagon. The fruit and vegetable man came around with a horse, as did the ice man. There were junk wagons who would take scrap metal and sell you, buy and sell pots and pans. There was even a grinding wagon. A guy came around with a grinder, and he would sharpen everybody's knives and tools. And the whole neighborhood was very, very populous, and everybody was related to everybody. So you were surrounded by family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and I should say, without exaggerating, dozens of cousins. They were everywhere you could go. And they were all within a couple of blocks of wherever you lived. It was really, really good. The streets were teeming with people, and there was a lot of play going on for the kids. As a young kid, the play on the streets worked in a graduated fashion. In the front of the brownstones, when you were a little kid, you were confined to your stoop. You couldn't get off the steps. And then you graduated eventually to the areaway. The areaway was the front garden that was gated. And so you could play in your areaway with the kids in your own building. Then you graduated to go outside the areaway onto the sidewalk in front of your house. And eventually you could use the sidewalk for the whole block as long as you didn't cross the street. And then when you grew up enough, you could cross the street. And if you were brave enough and tough enough and you were adventurous, you could go around the block, which was like going to Mars, because they had 100 kids on that block that didn't know you and they were hostile until you became a teenager and you went to high school and then you met people from a wider area. And the kids in Brooklyn in the 1940s amused themselves by playing games. This was even before television. Television was just coming in, so it wasn't a major factor. It wasn't even on all day. And the whole point was that kids in those days had to use their imaginations and make their own rules. Today, if you get little kids that are so used to supervision, that's all they get is supervision, they're incapable of starting a game or adjudicating a dispute, a foul or a fair ball. We had do-overs and all kinds of two-fins, timeout, all sorts of stuff. We made our own rules and used our own imagination. That was the most important thing. And Brooklyn, in those days, produced a spectacular array of creative people in show business and the arts, because I believe that the whole culture was nurturing of creativity and imagination. You had to do it. You had to make your own entertainment. And the games that we played back then were all over the place. Without going into detail, it was Buck Land, which we played on dirt with a little rectangle with a knife and carving it up into smaller and smaller or bigger and bigger pieces. Ring Olivio, hide and seek, May I or Giant Step, Kick the Can, and all forms of ball playing, stoop ball, where you hit the ball off the stoop. Street stickball, because there wasn't that much traffic. You could play in the street, and if anybody could hit a distance of 2 sewers, that was a power hitter, you know. And then there was fistball or punch ball, where you punch the ball with your hand. Handball off the wall. And then there was Chinese handball, which was on a bounce off any wall you could find, and it played with bouncing the ball. And the balls, the pink one was Pinkies. Somebody called them Pinkies. In our neighborhood, they were made by Spalding Company, the sporting goods company, and they were called Spaldings, which was a perversion of the Spalding name. And the other balls were gray, and they had a pimpled texture, and they would call them pimple balls. They had these little dots, raised dots on the surface, and they were a little bit softer. And we would go to Carroll Park right nearby and play poison ball. And poison ball was a particularly local concoction. It was played in a rectangular enclosed area, which was a wading pool in the summertime for little children, and it was fenced in. And one guy, one of the kids would get one of the tabloid newspapers, the Daily News or the Daily Mirror, and roll it up, and inside the roll would put rocks, like very much like a jelly roll pastry, and then tie it up with the baling wire that the papers were shipped with every day and dropped off at the newsstands. And it was a form of dodgeball played with the poison ball. And you got hit with that poison ball, you got hit. And if you caught it, when the guy threw it at you and it hit you and you didn't catch it, you were out. You were eliminated. On the other hand, if you caught it, then the person who threw it was out, and then you threw it at somebody else, and on down to the last person. So you had to be very resourceful to play poison ball and very careful about self-preservation. And then, of course, there were other games as well. The neighborhood was filled with good things to eat because of the varied ethnic makeup of the neighborhood. First and foremost was Italian lemon ice that all the pastry stores would sell, and we had 5 of them in the immediate neighborhood. Then, of course, there was ice cream, and there was a truck that would come around, Bungalow Bar. It was like the Good Humor truck. It was in some neighborhoods, but we had Bungalow Bar, and the truck had it looked like a little bungalow and had a picket fence for a side door where the driver would come in and out, and it had bells, and you'd hear it on the next block. And when they started ringing the bells to announce their arrival, the Bungalow Bar man, kids would salivate like Pavlov's dogs. You know, you were trained, you were broken in, and everybody wanted to buy ice cream. And then we had, in the summertime, a man with watermelon who cut the watermelon open and sell it by the slice. In the fall, we had jelly apples that the candy stores and bakeries would produce. And then there were bakery companies that would deliver to your house with small trucks, panel trucks, Krug's, Cushman's, Dugan's, and the most famous bakery in Brooklyn was Ebbinger's, because they made cakes. It was a German bakery, and they made wonderful, wonderful cakes, like chocolate buttercream cake or blackout cake, and everybody in Brooklyn knew those green boxes and loved them. In our particular neighborhood in South Brooklyn, there were a number of German bakeries with great crullers and breads and stuff. And then there were Italian pastry shops and Italian bread bakeries. And we had 5 pastry shops. One was better than the other. And time in Brooklyn would go by in an unconventional manner for kids. The year would go in not by months, it would go by seasons. And a season was usually 2 to 4 weeks long, depending on different circumstances. And it had to do with what you were playing with at the time. There was a chalk season where everybody had pastel chalk and would be writing on the walls and the sidewalks everywhere you go, and even grinding it up into powder and putting it into socks around Halloween and hitting each other with the chalk-filled socks. There was marble season. We played marbles. There was yo-yo season. There was wax season when kids would buy a fake wax teeth like vampire teeth, or whistles that were made of wax, or little bottles that were filled with syrup, they mimic Coke bottles made of wax, and you can drink the liquid, and then you could eat the wax or chew the wax. And then there was the water pistol season in the summertime, and darts. There was these little darts you could buy for a nickel. They were wooden darts with metal points and little feathers on them. And I remember one dart season, we had my little cousin Anna Marie, and my cousin Joe, her older brother, and our friend Luca, and we lined Anna Marie up against the wall and said, Anna Marie, don't move. We're going to throw the darts, but we're not going to hit you. We're going to skin you, which means we're going to come right next to you, like the knife thrower in the circus. And my cousin threw a dart, and he hit Anna Marie straight in the forehead, and there was a dart sticking out of her forehead, right in the bone of her forehead. And my Aunt Tina went crazy when she saw Anna Marie show up with the dart stuck in her head. That was a memorable experience. I don't know how we survived that one. And in the summertime, the Johnny Pump, we call fire hydrants Johnny Pumps. And the Johnny Pump was always open. The cops would come around and shut it, and somebody in the neighborhood would take a wrench out 2 minutes after the cops left and open it up again. That was our swimming pool. We had no swimming pools or anything else, except in Red Hook Park, which was quite far away. So the fire hydrant was our relief, and the kids would be out there playing, and it would be wonderful. In the wintertime, the fire hydrants obviously were shut, and we would make fires, curbside fires. There was always a fire burning, and you could go there, and some of us would buy or some of us would steal Mickey's, little potatoes from the vegetable stores, and we would roast them and eat them on the street. And in the summertime, there was no air conditioning, and people would sit and sleep on the fire escapes and the roofs and even on the stoops to escape the heavy heat and the humidity. In the fall, there would be bonfires in the street. There were two occasions for bonfires. One of them was Election Day, and the other one was if the Dodgers won the pennant, which they often did. And if the Dodgers won the pennant, some poor kid with a Yankee jacket would get it taken from him and put on a dummy, and we'd hang the dummy in effigy from a light post, and maybe if the kid was lucky, he'd get the jacket back. If not, they would burn the figure, the dummy with the Yankee jacket on it. And we all learned to tell time by looking out the window, and you could see looming over that whole section of Brooklyn was the Williamsburg Bank Tower, which had a very, very high tower. You could see it because by its name, it towered over all the low-profile buildings, so you could see it from miles away, and it had on four facets of the tower a lit clock that you could see from great distances. And that's how kids learned to tell time in my neighborhood. And then I was talking about the windowsill ladies, and the windowsill ladies used to just lean out the window and watch what was going on all day, and nothing on the block went unobserved, and they were like a human alarm system. If, as a kid, you misbehaved on the other end of the street and you did something wrong, you could come home and be greeted with a smack in the face because your mother got news of what happened before you even had a chance to walk home. And you couldn't get away with anything, and there was a great kind of security, and nobody in the neighborhood locked their doors. The doors were wide open all the time. People would drop in for coffee or a glass of wine or a drink of water or an iced tea, whatever, and talk or a piece of cake and share things. It was totally wide open. We had one of the first televisions on the block. It was, I don't know, it was no more than 12 inches. It was an Admiral console. And I remember people coming to our house, neighbors and family. On Tuesday nights, the living room would be crowded with people watching Milton Berle. On Friday nights, my uncles would come and watch the Friday night fights from Madison Square Garden, the Gillette Cavalcade of Sports. And on Sunday nights, people would come to watch Ed Sullivan. People were everywhere, and people shared their existence all the time. And you could always go to a neighbor for anything, borrow a cup of milk or tea or sugar or coffee, whatever you needed. There was no pretense about anything. As little kids, we got to take trips. I remember roller skating up Union Street to Park Slope to the beginning of Prospect Park. And we thought that was like going to China for us because we did it on roller skates. And if you were good, your parents took you once or twice in the summertime to Coney Island, which was that was like going to heaven as a little kid. We didn't have Disney World or any of that sort of thing. But Coney Island was with the Cyclone and all the different rides, the Steeplechase Park was fast, and the beach itself was fascinating. And that was a real outing. And we would go to Nathan's. We would go to Sheepshead Bay for clams at Lundy's, a big seafood house. We would sell clams on the half shell at the counter. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful treat. On Wednesday and Fridays, we ate fish. Once a week or so, we would have pizza. People made their own pizzas. We would go to one of the Italian bakeries and just buy the dough and take it home. And then your mother would make, with her own sauce and whatever toppings and cheese and everything else and bake it in the oven. And we would have our own pizzas made at home. In our neighborhood, there were two Sicilian focaccierias, which basically make a lot of fried food that's fast food from Sicily, including chickpea fritters called panelli. Had a deep fried in olive oil and served on a roll with covered with ricotta cheese and grated cheese. It's delicious. And we drank Manhattan Special, which wasn't from Manhattan. It was an espresso soda that was made on Manhattan Avenue in Greenpoint in Brooklyn. And we had two of the focaccierias. One of them is still there, Ferdinando's, and the other one was Don Paolino's. The streets in the 1950s, we had gangs. There were the two gangs that were prominent in our neighborhood, the Gowanus Dukes and the Kane Street Midgets. And the Gowanus Dukes were famous one year because they all got Mohican haircuts, which nobody got in those days. And the sides were all shaved on both sides, and there was a brush strip down the middle of the head, from the forehead to the nape of the neck. And so you could always tell the Gowanus Dukes. And we were little kids, we were in awe of these guys. And they all hung out in our local schoolyard called PS 32, which was right adjacent to the Gowanus Canal, which could usually come up with a dead body floating there every once in a while. And PS 32 schoolyard is where we spent most of our time. In the summertime, it was called VP 32, which means Vacation Playground 32. We didn't have any summer camps. We would go to the PS 32, and it would be open on rainy days. We could go inside and do arts and crafts, and sunny days we'd be out in the schoolyard and doing different activities. Or we could walk a few blocks down Union Street to the 76th Precinct PAL if you were brave enough to fight your way through alien blocks that you had to cross through. We had a couple of stores on the corner right of Union and Smith where I lived. One of them was a German delicatessen, and the owner was a guy called Hunts, and his daughter Ruth, who was my babysitter when I was a little kid. And then we had an Italian mini supermarket called Gabriel's. And I would go down there, and sometimes you didn't even need money. You could go down there, your mother sent you for groceries, and she would pay Gabriel later on. He would keep a little tab. And we had two movie theaters in our neighborhood on Court Street. One of them was the Paris Court, Paras, because the man that owned it, his name was Paris Condola, and that was his theater. And then the other one was called the Lido. And they both had the same kind of a program. On Saturdays was Kids' Day. Wednesdays they would have women. They would have rom-coms, romantic movies, and they would have dish nights. And women could go and get for their attendance, along with their attendance, a free dish. And you'd end up, if you went long enough, with the service for 12. Cups, saucers, dishes, platters, what have you. And people would do that. But on Saturdays, it was kids' time from 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And your parents would give you a quarter. And with that quarter, you use 15 cents to get in the movie. And when you got in the movie, you can use the other dime for an ice cream, 10 cents, called a Mellow Roll, which was a round tubular-shaped ice cream that was eaten horizontally in a cone. And we had three movies. One of them was an action movie, a war or a cowboy movie. Another one was a comedy. It was either Abbott and Costello or Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis or that sort of thing. And the other one was a monster movie. Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein, Godzilla, what have you. And then sometimes they would cross genres, and they would have Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman or something like that. And it would be, crossing two genres. But you had 3 feature films, 25 cartoons, 1 movie-tone newsreel, talking about the Korean War or World War II or whatever it was at that particular time. And you would have 3 short series. One of them was Flash Gordon, the other one was Superman, and the other guy was Don Winslow of the Coast Guard. By the time you got out of the movie on Saturday afternoon, if you went in at 12 o'clock, you came out at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and it was summertime, you were blinded by the glaring sun. You couldn't even see. You had to close your eyes to get home. And it was really, really something. The kids loved it. And we had matrons in the movies with a searchlight making sure the kids behaved and didn't fight or anything like that and kept order. And then we lived in a brownstone, and we lived on the 3rd or 4th floors. And the first 2 floors were occupied by our landlord and landlady, and they were from Trieste. And all I knew, his name was Mr. Rudy, and his wife was La Signora, or the landlady. And my brothers and I, as little kids, would go down to their basement in the fall and crush grapes for the homemade wine that they were making. We would stomp on the grapes. We would wash our feet, and we would stomp on the grapes with our little feet and make wine for Mr. Rudy and La Signora. And then in the springtime in June, we'd have roses in the backyard. And La Signora would cut every day, every school day would cut for me 5 or 6 roses, make a little bouquet for me to bring to one of the nuns at St. Agnes where I was going to school, for the teachers. And that was always, made you popular with the teachers. You had fresh flowers. And it was a nice memory going to school with those fresh flowers. Well, in this day and age, South Brooklyn is now divided into 4 neighborhoods for real estate purposes, I guess. Where I lived is called Carroll Gardens. Alongside that is Cobble Hill and Borum Hill. And then there's Red Hook, which has become an art colony. And it's very fancy these days. It's gentrified and it's very popular. And it's a nice place to be. And there's all kinds of French shops and this, that, and the other boutiques and fancy, schmancy stuff. And just like everything else in America, in that neighborhood, we have more, but it's less. We enjoyed ourselves a lot more then than we do now. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.